Welcome to the Deep Dive. If you've ever felt like your phone is, well, less a tool and maybe more a demanding little box of tasks, you're definitely in the right place. Today, we're unpacking a stack of sources that look not just at technology and social media, but really through them. We're examining the profound, fundamental ways digital life reshapes our daily routines, how it molds our habits, and maybe even changes how we think, how we process information itself.
Yeah, and this is, it's crucial because the source material we're looking at today, it goes beyond just the usual surface level warnings you hear. It offers these conversational, yet really quite insightful observations on the everyday friction points, the realities of modern living. Our goal here is to extract the surprising, maybe the actionable nuggets about achieving digital balance, understanding the psychological mechanics sort of baked into the apps we use every day, and also looking ahead at the rapidly approaching future of artificial intelligence. Okay, let's get into it. Our mission for this deep dive is really to try and settle a fundamental tension. Are we truly using technology as a helpful tool, something that serves us?
Or has it started to, run our lives, setting the agenda, dictating where our attention goes? We're diving deep into that quest for control in the digital age. And we're going to start right when the moment you wake up. So let's begin with maybe the most intimate, vulnerable moment of the day, that transition from sleep to actually being awake. What's the very first thing you do? Maybe even before your feet hit the floor. The sources we looked at suggest an almost unbelievable figure. Something like 90% of people immediately check their phones upon waking. That's not just a coincidence, is it? It feels like a foundational habit now.
It really is. And it's perhaps the ultimate indicator of outsourced control, you could say. What's fascinating here, thinking about it from a cognitive perspective, is the immediate transition we force on ourselves. When we first wake up, our brain is often in that theta wave state, that sort of slow, dreamy, creative bridge between sleep and full alertness. By immediately hitting that screen, grabbing the phone, we actually bypass that gentle transition. We jump straight into a high alert, maybe even stress-driven beta wave state. We're instantly reacting to external demands.
That's a really powerful distinction you make there. Theta versus beta, sort of rest versus reaction. And this brings us straight to a core idea highlighted in our materials. This concept that technology can run something, meaning it exerts this pervasive control or management over it. When, as you said, 9 out of 10 people start their day by engaging with whatever demands their device throws at them, it certainly creates that feeling that, the phone owns us, not the other way around.
Right. And the sources really compel us to draw a line, a distinction between true ownership, being in control, and just useful management. We absolutely have to acknowledge that technology can be a positive manager in some ways. Think about the utility. You've got apps that track sophisticated biometric data, like, say, continuous heart rate variability, or those apps that enforce beneficial behavioral loops, like reminding you to stand up every hour or making sure you hit your hydration goals for the day. In those cases, the tech is managing small aspects of your life for your overall well-being. It's like management by proxy.
Okay, so that's the helpful side. But where does that helpful management tip over into something less helpful, maybe even insidious? Our materials warn about that moment when tech starts to get out of hand, when the managing tool itself becomes uncontrollable. So if your fitness tracker tells you to drink water, fine, that's management. But if you feel this surge of stress and guilt because you missed a step count goal by a few hundred steps, or maybe if you refuse to eat a meal until you've logged its exact caloric content, well, then the tool has stopped serving your health, hasn't it? It started dictating your anxiety instead.
Precisely. That's the tipping point. The moment the measurement itself becomes the metric for your self-worth, the tool has definitely become the master. And this leads to a really important hypothetical question that the source materials posed. What would the emotional impact truly be if you managed to start your day consistently without screens? Would you feel this overwhelming sense of calm? Would you be able to establish your own internal mental baseline before all those external demands start hitting you? Or would the immediate panic set in, that fear of missing an urgent work email or an emergency text from family? Does that just reinforce the feeling of external ownership?
I suspect many of us, if we're honest, are probably locked into the panic side of that equation.
Yeah.
It feels like we've outsourced not just our attention, but also our sense of digital responsibility. The dependence has become this kind of neurological habit loop, hasn't it? And reclaiming that first moment of the day, that attention, it feels like a massive undertaking. And that dependence loop, that habit, leads us directly into the second major behavior the sources really analyze: the scroll.
Once we get past that initial morning check, we often settle into what's become, frankly, a dominant feature of our leisure time. The materials estimate that many users spend around 2 hours a day just on social media. Now, to put that into perspective, that's 14 hours a week. That's approaching 700 hours a year.
Wow. That's
Substantially more than a part-time job, just dedicated solely to consuming content. And the defining characteristic of this consumption, according to the research we looked at, is that it's often performed mindlessly. Now, that doesn't mean without intelligence, obviously, but simply without a conscious purpose or without really paying attention. We've all felt it, haven't we? Scrolling through maybe 50 posts, only to realize you couldn't actually recall a single one afterwards. Exactly. And the defining trap of that mindless engagement is how easily we lose track of time. The classic scenario described in the sources, and I think we can all relate, is the intention of opening your phone for maybe a quick 5-minute utility check. Perhaps you needed to verify an address or respond to just one text message, and then suddenly you look up and an hour has just vanished.
Yeah.
These platforms, we have to understand, are engineered specifically to dismantle the temporal boundaries of your attention.
Right. And this is where the deep dive really earns its name, I think, because as you just pointed out, this time sink isn't some accident. It's the intended feature. It's by design. The core observation from the material is that social media is explicitly designed to keep someone hooked. This isn't just about content, it's psychological engineering. We need to understand the mechanisms. How exactly are they keeping us hooked?
Well, it primarily boils down to the use of variable reinforcement schedules. It's a classic behavioral psych technique. Think of it like a slot machine in Vegas. You pull the lever, or in this case, you scroll, and the next piece of content might be incredibly engaging, funny, or emotionally resonant. Or it might be completely boring, irrelevant. That unpredictability, that variable reward, keeps the dopamine system in your brain constantly activated, constantly seeking the next potential hit. Unlike, say, a book, which has chapters and a logical stopping point, or a television show with clear episode breaks, the infinite scroll deliberately removes all stopping cues. It creates a bottomless consumption loop.
It really is the perfect behavioral science trap. They're incentivized, the platforms are, to monopolize those 2 hours or more a day because our attention is the product they sell. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we can't just focus on the negative. We need to remember the positive side too. The sources are actually quite careful to highlight the critical role of connection and utility that these platforms can provide.
Indeed, absolutely. For many people, especially those trying to maintain contact with friends or family who live abroad, things like weekly video calls or instant messaging are essential lifelines. Technology facilitates that connection, that community, seamlessly. Things that would have been maybe financially or logistically impossible just a generation ago. So the technology does serve a crucial human need for connection.
Okay, so the question then becomes, how do we extract that essential utility, that connection, without falling into the engineered trap, the time sink?
The materials stress the immense importance of using tech on purpose, not by habit. Okay. Meaning you should open the app because you have a defined goal, maybe to share a specific photo with a family member or to coordinate a specific meeting time, not just because your hand and thumb automatically click the icon when you noticed a slight lull in conversation or a moment of boredom. And that transition from that automatic habitual behavior to purposeful use, it's extremely difficult because habits, by their nature, are so deeply ingrained in our neurology. That's why the sources advocate for structured, deliberate breaks from technology. They discuss the concept of a detox, meaning taking a planned, maybe short-term break, usually over a weekend perhaps, specifically with the goal of feeling mentally healthier.
Right, the digital detox. But let's maybe complicate that idea a little because the research isn't entirely simple. The sources do suggest that while the subsequent piece is real, the experience of a detox weekend being surprisingly peaceful, the initial transition can be quite jarring. Did the sources give any indication of how that initial withdrawal phase actually feels for people?
They do. They highlight that the first 24 to maybe 48 hours often generate significant irritability, restlessness, even a form of low-grade anxiety. It happens simply because the brain is searching for that expected stimulation cycle that it's become used to. It's a necessary discomfort, in a way, that actually proves the depth of the dependency we've developed. The peace, that feeling of calm, it only really comes once the cognitive load, that constant background hum of anticipated notifications and needing to check, begins to subside.
Yeah.
That allows the mind to actually recharge.
It sounds less like a relaxing weekend off and more like mandatory, maybe even slightly painful cognitive recalibration. That really points to a bigger question about what we are sacrificing, maybe unconsciously, for all this digital convenience. And that sacrifice, what we give up, leads us quite naturally to the central philosophical debate that came up repeatedly in the sources. the intelligence paradox.
Is technology ultimately making society intellectually lazy? Because it removes the mental effort that we previously needed for things like retaining information and basic problem solving. Or is it actually making us smarter? Because it provides infinite, immediate access to information and maybe frees up our cognitive capacity for higher level thinking.
Let's examine the evidence for the lazy side first, the outsourcing of basic cognitive functions, because this seemed to resonate quite deeply in the source materials. And let's be honest, we are probably all guilty of this kind of technological dependence to some degree. Think about memory retention, the simple, now incredibly common, inability to remember phone numbers, or important dates, or even basic factual knowledge. Why? Because your device stores it all for you. We've essentially outsourced rote memorization almost entirely.
And that dependence extends quite severely to things like spatial awareness, too, a skill that was traditionally vital to human autonomy. The sources specifically mentioned the widespread reliance on GPS and apps like Google Maps, even for incredibly simple, short navigations, like finding a new cafe that's only, say, 3 blocks away from where you are. There was even an admission in one source of someone feeling guilty about needing the app just to navigate parts of their own familiar neighborhood. We are potentially seeing an atrophy in our ability to create mental maps and to reason spatially without assistance.
It really is almost like a cognitive crutch, isn't it? If you don't use the muscle, it weakens. But, okay, we must switch to the other side of the argument, the empowerment side. Because that very same device that stops us from remembering a phone number gives us truly unprecedented access to knowledge. Knowledge that was historically reserved for, elite scholars or people with access to vast libraries. You can literally look up, search for, and immediately retrieve any historical fact, scientific principle, or complex concept in mere seconds. That capacity for instant learning, you called it synthetic retrieval earlier.
Synthetic retrieval, yes, I think that's a perfect term for it. The depth of knowledge available at our fingertips is practically boundless. The critical difference here, though, is the shift in cognitive priority. What our brains need to focus on has changed. In the past, maybe the main challenge was acquiring information, finding it, memorizing it. Now the challenge is much more about synthesizing that information, filtering it, and applying it effectively. So when you can instantly access every major scientific paper ever written on climate change, for example, your energy should ideally shift from just memorizing the data points to analyzing the correlations between different studies, understanding the methodologies, and maybe debating the policy implications. That's a higher order skill.
So, the sources seem to suggest that technology doesn't inherently make us lazy or smart. It simply, and this feels like the key insight, it changes what we focus on. We might be moving away from focusing solely on what psychologists call crystallized intelligence, the accumulated facts and skills we hold, and perhaps shifting more towards fluid intelligence, which is the capacity to reason, to solve novel problems, to think critically and adaptively.
And that leads directly to the synthesis, the balanced view. The real goal isn't just about being labeled lazy or smart. It's about being wise in how we use it. Wisdom, in this context, requires consciously defining which cognitive tasks are relatively safe to outsource, like remembering an obscure phone number, perhaps, and distinguishing those from the skills, like critical thinking, conceptual connection making, and maybe empathetic analysis, that are still fundamentally worth cultivating within ourselves. We need to ensure we are not just passive consumers of information, but active, discerning thinkers.
That really is the difference between simple retrieval and actual application, isn't it? If you only ever rely on the retrieval system, you might struggle to apply that knowledge creatively or effectively in new situations. It's also, I think, the ultimate accountability check on our education system, too. How do we teach wisdom, not just recall?
Okay, so transitioning from our internal habits and cognitive shifts, we absolutely must address the paramount necessity of online safety and digital security, particularly as the source materials consistently highlight the impulsive nature of our digital lives.
Yeah, the ease of sharing seems to be the core of the problem, right?
Yeah.
It's just so easy. The sources highlight a crucial point. People share so much online without thinking. The frictionless nature of communication tapping share or post encourages impulsive action. And this often leads to oversharing sensitive personal information, financial details, maybe even real-time location data, or clicking on links without proper vetting. The sheer speed of it all encourages us to ignore the potential long-term repercussions of creating that permanent digital footprint.
Exactly. That's why the central safety phrase quoted in the materials is absolutely essential. We really cannot overstate its importance. Think before you click.
This needs to be the foundational firewall. It's the mental pause button against everything from malware and phishing scams to identity compromise and serious reputational damage. It mandates putting in a cognitive pause in an environment that is fundamentally designed for instantaneous reaction. Right. If we can just instill that moment of pause, we regain a significant amount of control. But beyond just protecting ourselves from external threats like scams, the sources also strongly emphasize the necessity of self-imposed disconnection. For our own mental resilience, this is where we bring in that phrasal verb log off, which means more than just closing the app, right? It means deliberately signing out from a computer or a social media account and actually stepping away for a substantial period.
Yes, and the physical and mental benefits of doing this are quite concrete, according to the research cited. Spending dedicated time offline helps you recharge your mind. Studies mentioned in the material discuss how the sustained vigilance required to process fragmented digital input, constantly shifting attention between text, images, video, notifications, creates this low-level, continuous cognitive load. It's tiring. The brain actually needs silence and unstructured downtime to properly process experiences and consolidate information, something the constant digital hum actively prevents.
And this isn't just about avoiding the blue light from screens before bed, although that's part of it. It's more fundamentally about reclaiming presence, being here. The materials offer such a practical and, frankly, powerful step toward achieving this. Just going for a walk, but deliberately leaving the phone at home. And just focusing on being present in your immediate physical environment, noticing things.
It's a deliberate reversal of the scrolling behavior we talked about earlier. Instead of the digital world dictating what you look at next, what captures your attention, you are reclaiming the power to observe your actual surroundings without mediation, without a filter. That simple act, just being truly present, noticing the breeze or the sounds around you, can significantly reduce the perceived stress and the sense of urgency that the digital sphere often creates.
And this all culminates in what the sources rather brilliantly called the best technology tip ever, which is sometimes the best app is no app. That feels like the ultimate realization. The tool must serve the user's quality of life. And sometimes the best way for it to serve you is for you to just put the tool down, log off, and engage with the real world directly. That feels like the ultimate realization.
Yeah.
Okay, now we really must gaze into the future, because this entire conversation about digital control, habits, and attention is already being fundamentally reshaped by the massive disruptor on the horizon: artificial intelligence.
The sources specifically mention the power and increasing prevalence of large language models, citing tools like ChatGPT as examples. And they project that the impact of AI will be, massive across key sectors,
Right.
fundamentally changing jobs, the nature of education, and even the essence of creativity itself.
Yeah, the speed of change here feels genuinely unlike anything we've experienced before in technological shifts. It's exponential. And with that speed, understandably, comes fear. We have to address that immediate, almost visceral public anxiety that AI will simply take over, that it will gain control, replace entire job functions wholesale, and maybe even eclipse human intellectual contribution entirely. That's a real fear out there.
It is, and that fear seems to stem primarily from viewing AI as a total replacement, or maybe a direct competitor, rather than seeing it as a potential collaborator. The sources, quite effectively, I thought, counter this anxiety by focusing on partnership. On the concept of AI as a form of cognitive scaffolding, AI is exceptionally good at certain things: high-volume data retrieval, complex pattern recognition, generating rapid first drafts of text or code, things humans can find tedious or time-consuming.
Okay, so instead of replacing, say, the writer entirely, the AI might replace the tedious work of generating that very first rough draft. Is that the idea? The sources suggest AI can help us come up with, create or think of initial structures, summarize complex data sets, or suggest code snippets, rather than replacing the critical thinking that's required to then vet, refine, and add nuance to those initial ideas.
Precisely. Think of it in the context of our earlier discussion on the intelligence paradox and outsourcing. If we currently outsource rote memorization to Google search or phone contacts, maybe we'll increasingly outsource tedious, repetitive process tasks to AI. This potentially shifts the human expert's burden away from just generating volume towards providing context, ethical judgment, deep domain-specific knowledge, and strategic insight. These are the areas where AI, at least currently, still struggles profoundly. For example, an AI might be able to draft a legal brief based on case law, but the human lawyer is still needed to understand the subtle context of a particular judge's previous rulings, or to apply nuanced negotiation strategy based on human psychology.
Right.
It forces us, maybe in a good way, to truly specialize in our uniquely human capabilities: empathy, critical contextual analysis, ethical reasoning, strategic foresight.
The future of many jobs might involve a significant amount of what people are starting to call prompt engineering, basically. Learning how to communicate effectively with the AI to extract the maximum value. Essentially treating the AI like the world's most powerful, knowledgeable, but perhaps slightly literal-minded intern.
And the future possibilities discussed are vast and quite exciting, actually. The materials speculate about AI's potential to dramatically aid in things like personalized education and language learning. Imagine having instantaneous, customized conversational partners who can provide immediate, targeted feedback on your pronunciation or grammar 24/7. Or, perhaps a bit more playfully, the notion was floated that someday an advanced AI might even be capable of hosting a deep dive like this one, meticulously synthesizing data for a global audience.
If that happens, I think I'm taking my digital detox weekend and making it permanent. But the core takeaway seems clear. The future isn't necessarily about AI replacing us entirely across the board. It's more likely about AI defining the new lower bound of cognitive tasks, forcing us humans to elevate our game, to define where genuine, irreplaceable human value truly lies. Well, this has been a really expansive and, I think, necessary deep dive today. We've covered everything from the neurological shock of that digital morning ritual right through to the psychological design behind mindful versus mindless scrolling. We tackled that fascinating philosophical debate about outsourcing intelligence and looked ahead to the future of collaboration with AI.
Yeah, and through all these different threads, the sources consistently bring us back to a central unifying theme. And it really is the key takeaway for you, the listener, the learner. Technology is an immensely powerful tool. It's capable of extraordinary management, utility, connection. But its ultimate value, its benefit versus its detriment, is entirely contingent on you establishing and actively maintaining control. If you don't consciously run your technology, make no mistake, it will absolutely run your life.
And if we circle back to that crucial insight we discussed, the technology fundamentally changes what we focus on. Outsourcing tasks like rote memorization and simple navigation. It forces us, I think, to ask a conscious and maybe quite crucial question about our own future capabilities. If every fact, every street route, every basic piece of information is instantly retrievable by an app or an AI in our pocket, how do we then consciously choose and deliberately cultivate the core skills and the deep knowledge that are still worth holding inside our own minds? How do we strengthen that fluid intelligence, that human wisdom, even when the instant retrieval system is always right there, tempting us with its ease?
It really forces us to decide what it truly means to know something anymore, now that we can instantly look up almost everything. That's the challenge ahead.
Some real food for thought there. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.